Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. A small gold pin, a handful of poisonous berries. At face value, they're props. Trinkets in a brutal reality show. But here's the real question. How does a single girl from the seam turn a bird on her jacket and some nightlock in her hand into the beginning of the end for a capital built on fear? You think back to the early games, when the message was simple. You step out of line, your district burns. Your children die on screen. No symbols, no hope, just punishment. So why the change? Why start selling romance, costumes, and clever tokens? Why let a tribute walk into the arena wearing her dead father's hunting jacket and a pin no one bothered to vet? The Capitol designed the Hunger Games to prevent another rebellion. That was the whole promise. One annual reminder that resistance is pointless. But the exact mechanics that kept Panem obedient, the spectacle, the victors, the carefully managed hope, are the same ones that created Katniss Everdeen. That part matters because it means she isn't an exception to the system. She's a product of it. On paper, Katniss is the last person you'd cast as a revolutionary leader. She hates crowds. She freezes on stage. She avoids eye contact, avoids attachment, avoids any relationship that could get someone killed. This is a girl who just wants her sister safe, her mother stable, and enough food to not starve in District 12. So why does she become the most effective symbol of resistance the games ever produce? Here's the twist. It isn't in spite of her trauma. It's because of how trauma works. Katniss grows up with her primary attachment figure blown apart in a mine explosion, and a mother who disappears into grief. At 11, she becomes the provider, the hunter, the one who slips under the fence and bargains in the hob. Her brain is wired for survival long before the cameras ever find her. So when the Capitol drops her into an arena, they're not breaking a normal teenager. They're weaponizing someone whose entire identity is already built around keeping other people alive. This is where we talk about the real question. Not how did Katniss become a hero, but what went so wrong in the Capitol's psychological design that a terrified, traumatized teenager became their most dangerous weapon? Why does a girl who never volunteers for attention end up volunteering for her sister, honoring Rue with flowers, saluting District 11, and then threatening mass double suicide with Nightlock rather than play by the rules? There is a lot to uncover here. Across all 4 games, the original arena, the quarter quell, and the war that turns the Capitol itself into a battlefield, we're going to cover Katniss's attachment style, her survival instincts, and the fractured identities of Katniss, the girl on fire, and the Mockingjay. By the end, you'll see how every choice the Capitol makes to control her actually forges the one victor they can't own, and why their greatest tool of fear grows up to aim the games right back at them. Why Katniss's mind matters more than her bow, so if the Capitol accidentally forged the one victor they can't own, here's the real question. Why Katniss? Why does this specific girl, from the poorest district, with no interest in crowds or speeches, become the symbol that burns a country down? At face value, you can read the Hunger Games as cool archery shots, a tense love triangle, and a scrappy rebellion. Bows, berries, kisses, explosions. It works as an action story, but there is a lot to uncover here once you zoom in on Katniss's mind. Underneath the spectacle, you're watching a chronically traumatized teenager being pushed through state-designed abuse and propaganda, and the story only really snaps into focus when you track what that does to her psychology. So why does she keep surviving when she doesn't even want to be a symbol? Why does she break the game's script again and again? Why do both Snow and Coin misread her so badly? Those questions are where the real story lives. The arena is built to reward selfish calculation and spectacle. Katniss's brain has been wired, since age 11, for something else. Hyper-vigilant caretaking. Parentified survival. Her father dies violently. Her mother emotionally disappears. She becomes the provider. The Capitol thinks it's getting a killer. What it actually gets is a protector. That part matters because it reframes what victory even is. Winning the games doesn't end Katniss's suffering. It upgrades it. In the first arena, the threats are honest, fireballs, mutts, other tributes. You can point your bow at those. After she wins, the arena just changes shape. Now it's cameras, interviews, Victor's village isolation, and the constant threat that anyone she loves can be killed on live television. The promise of safety becomes the weapon. Every reward the Capitol hands her, fame, a mansion on the hill, guaranteed food for her district, looks generous at face value. But functionally, it's another psychological cage. Victor's village separates her from the seam, so her new comfort is tied to their continued suffering. The cameras turn her relationship with Peter into a commodity, so her private self becomes a performance. Even the gift of Prim's safety is conditional, hanging on Katniss playing the role correctly. We're going to cover how her attachment wounds and survival instincts collide with each of these cages, but the key point here is simple. The games don't stop when the cannon fires. This is where we talk about your stakes as a viewer. If you read Katniss as a chosen one, the story is a fantasy about destiny and bravery. If you read her as a traumatized girl being weaponized by a system, it becomes a case study in how power structures find vulnerable people, plug their fear and loyalty into propaganda, and aim them at enemies. So what happens when that weapon refuses to aim where it's pointed? When the girl who's supposed to sell hope to the districts starts using live television to mourn Rue, salute District 11, and threaten double suicide with poison berries, once you see that, you can't unsee it. And the next arena and the next symbol look very different. Our lens, trauma, attachment, and a weaponized teenager, so when you watch Katniss cover Rue's body in flowers or pull out those poison berries, it feels emotional first. But here's the real question. What kind of mind does that under that level of threat on live television against the most powerful capital in the world? Our claim in this video is pretty blunt. The Capitol didn't just underestimate Katniss Everdeen. It engineered the exact psychological conditions that made someone like her almost inevitable, and then completely failed to understand the weapon it had forged. You're not just looking at a brave girl from the poor district, you're looking at a long-term trauma experiment that finally backfired. So this is where we talk about our lens. We're going to cover Katniss less as a YA protagonist, and more as a complex PTSD case study trapped inside a live political science project, run first by Snow and later quietly hijacked by Coin. That part matters because it explains why her decisions feel both impulsive and strangely consistent, why she keeps breaking the script of the games while still playing to win. Start with childhood. Her father is her primary attachment figure, then he dies violently in a mining explosion. Her mother collapses inward, emotionally gone. At 11, Katniss becomes the parent, the provider, the one who keeps Prim alive. That's textbook parentification. It wires her brain for hypervigilance, for scanning every bush in the woods, and every face in the hob, for assuming that if she doesn't act, everyone she loves dies. At face value, that's perfect tribute material. A kid who already lives in a constant low-level games, hunting illegally, calculating risk, normalizing the idea that any day could be your last. But trauma also shapes attachment. She learns that adults are unreliable, institutions are deadly, and promises from the capital are traps. So she bonds hard to a tiny circle, Prim, Gale, eventually Peter, and distrusts everyone else, including every symbol she's forced to become. That's where our second lens comes in, survival brain versus moral brain. In the arena, her survival brain is brilliant. Snares, water, distance from the careers, yet over and over her moral brain hijacks the match. She honors Rue's body instead of hiding, salutes District 11, refuses to kill Peter even when the rules change back. None of that is strategically smart. It is, however, psychologically inevitable for someone carrying moral injury from years of doing whatever it takes to feed a starving family. Layered over that is a fragmented identity. There's Katniss the Hunter from District 12, the girl on fire, crafted by Cinna for the opening ceremonies. The Mockingjay, scripted by Plutarch and Coin. And the private self that only Prim and Peter ever really see, the terrified, dissociated teenager having flashbacks on the train and nightmares in Victor's village. There is a lot to uncover here because each role pulls on different trauma responses: performance, numbness, rage, guilt. We're not diagnosing a real person, but we are going to use real concepts: hypervigilance, dissociation, moral injury, to track why she keeps accidentally turning propaganda into rebellion. Across 4 arenas, if you count the capital invasion, the same pattern repeats. The capital tries to aim her, and her trauma keeps kicking the weapon back. So how do those early attachment wounds translate into a girl who can bring down 2 regimes without ever wanting to lead anything? To answer that, we have to go back to District 12, to the seam, and to an 11-year-old with a bow and a starving sister. What we're unpacking today, and the twist at the end. So here's how we're going to untangle that 11-year-old with a bow into the woman who shoots a president on live TV. First, we go all the way back to District 12. This is where we talk about how poverty, hunger, and losing her father don't just make Katniss tough. They literally wire her brain for survival. We'll look at the seam, the mines, the black market at the hob, and how being forced to parent her own mother turns her into a hyper-independent protector who trusts almost no one. That part matters because once you understand her attachment wounds, every irrational decision in the games suddenly has a clear internal logic. Then we move into the first Hunger Games, not as an action story, but as a psychological rebellion. At face value, she's just trying to stay alive. But why does she honor Rue with flowers? Why does she salute District 11? Why does she refuse to kill Peter, even when the rules change back? We're going to cover how each of those choices breaks the Capitol's script, not because she wants to be a symbol, but because her survival brain and her moral brain keep colliding in ways Snow doesn't anticipate. From there, we hit Catching Fire, where the trauma starts to stack. Nightmares, flashbacks, the way she jumps at every sound in Victor's village. Classic hypervigilance. The Capitol throws her back into the arena anyway. Here's the real question. What happens when you drop someone with complex PTSD into a second death match and then secretly build a revolution around her without telling her? We'll track how the Quarter Quell turns her from reluctant victor into accidental weapon. Then we enter the Mockingjay era, where the symbol finally breaks. This is where we talk about her dissociation, her shutdowns in District 13, and the way she keeps being aimed by different powers. Coin, Plutarch, Snow, even as her sense of self collapses. We'll follow her all the way to that twist ending, killing Coin instead of Snow. I'm going to argue that it's not a twist at all, but the only move her psychology ever really allowed, and we'll build to that step by step. After that, we won't stop at the fade to black. We'll look at her post-war life, the field, the children she never wanted, and what healing even means when the games have lived in your nervous system since childhood. Threaded through all of this, we'll map her relationships with Prim, her mother, Gale, and Peter as mirrors of those early wounds. Why does she cling to Prim but resent her mother? Why does her bond with Gale feel conditional, while Peter keeps offering unconditional presence she doesn't know how to hold? Each relationship is a survival strategy in disguise. We'll also compare book Katniss to movie Katniss, what the films soften, what they amplify, and how that changes our sense of her agency and heroism. Is she a brave leader, or a traumatized girl being dragged from arena to arena? And then, near the end, we'll open one last door. What if she never volunteered? Would the Capitol system have produced another Katniss, or was this exact mix of trauma and empathy a once-in-a-century mistake? That's the speculative question we'll use to test everything we've uncovered. Welcome to Victor's Village, our niche in the arena. And if you're sitting there wondering how deep this rabbit hole really goes, this is where we talk about what this channel actually is. We basically live in the Victor's Village of YouTube, not the flashy Capitol Boulevard with reaction clips and surface level who would win the games, but the weird little cul-de-sac where you and I walk around counting security cameras and asking why Snow put the fountain there. At face value, we're talking about Katniss's psychology. But here's the real question. What else does her story expose about the entire system that built her? If you're new here, this channel is all Hunger Games, all the time. World building, psychology, politics, the quiet details that cameras almost miss. We're going to cover why District 12's fence suddenly turns on the day she climbs it, why Peter's missing leg disappears between book and film, why Haymitch's decayed house matters more than half the Capitol parade. There is a lot to uncover here, and the reason we zoom in so far is simple. Every tiny design choice tells you something about control, about hope, about who's allowed to survive. This video is part of an ongoing series on how the Capitol's own systems backfire. The games, the propaganda, the rewards, all of it. Victor's Village is supposed to be a promise. You win, you're safe, your district worships you, the games end. But then Snow reaps from the existing pool of victors for the Quarter Quell and snaps that promise in half. That part matters because Katniss becomes the flagship example of a design flaw turned revolution. She's the glitch the Capitol accidentally coded in when they tried to weaponize trauma and ended up mass-producing sympathy instead. So if you're the kind of person who pauses the movie to check which districts are cheering, who remembers that Katniss is parentified at 11, who cares that in the books she hides in an empty Victor's Village house when the fence is electrified, you're in the right district. We're going to cover other victors, game makers, and whole districts with the same depth. Why Johanna's rage is a different answer to the same abuse. Why Beatty's relationship with tech is its own quiet rebellion. Why Snow thinks a little hope is useful until it isn't. No hard sell here. If you want to keep exploring Panem with us, hit subscribe and join our version of The Village, a place where we pick apart Tesserae math, propaganda strategy, and why no one in District 12 ever really believes in a happy ending. Because from here on, we're taking a long walk through Katniss's internal Victor's Village, the mansion the Capitol built inside her head. Room by room, we'll look at the survival brain, the moral brain, the Mockingjay persona, and the private self only Prim and Peter ever see, and why, no matter how gilded it is, she keeps trying to burn it down. Before the reaping, how District 12 builds a survivor to understand that mansion in her head You have to see the foundation it's sitting on. Before the cameras, before the arena, Katniss is already living in a slow-motion disaster zone. The Seam isn't just a poor neighborhood in District 12. It's an ongoing experiment in how much deprivation a population can take without open revolt. Chronic hunger isn't an event there. It's the background noise. So you grow up counting every grain of salt, every crumb of bread. You learn that a good day is when no one passes out at school. At face value, that's just poverty. But here's the real question. What does it do to an 11-year-old brain when starvation is the default setting? It normalizes risk. It trains you to take illegal game through the fence because the alternative is watching Prim's ribs show. This is where we talk about the woods. For most people in 12, that boundary line is a death sentence. Cross it, and the peacekeepers or the electric fence will get you. For Katniss, that part matters because the woods become the only place where the rules bend in her favor. She's trespassing, poaching, technically committing crimes against the Capitol every single day just to keep her family alive. So by the time the games show up, the relationship between danger and survival is already flipped in her mind. Safety is the real threat because safety means passivity, and passivity means hunger. Then the mine explodes. Her father isn't just dad. He's the attachment figure, the singing partner, the one who makes the world feel coherent. 1 second he's going underground, the next there's a blast and fragments of bodies. You're not just losing a parent, you're losing the person who made the woods feel safe. The promise that if you follow him, you'll be okay, is gone in a single workday. The reason that moment is so psychologically brutal is the double hit, violent loss plus economic catastrophe. Her sense of safety shatters, and immediately after, her mother emotionally checks out. Not because she doesn't care, but because she's drowning in her own trauma. To a child, that's functional abandonment. So Katniss steps in. Around 11, she becomes the parent. She hunts, she bargains at the hob, she monitors her mother's vacant gaze and shields Prim from it. That's parentification. The child becomes provider, protector, emotional buffer. And once you've survived that, how much are you ever going to trust an institution again? Peacekeepers don't feed you. The Capitol doesn't send grief counselors. The only consistent pattern her brain learns is, if I don't do it, we die. We're going to cover hypervigilance a lot in this analysis, but it starts here. Katniss is always scanning for game, for peacekeepers, for signs her mother is slipping again. That constant threat detection system is miserable in ordinary life, but incredibly adaptive in an arena built on ambushes. And the woods, they become her first arena and her first coping mechanism. Every trip past the fence is exposure therapy, heart-racing danger everywhere, but she still has to line up the shot. Hunting regulates her anxiety, focusing on a squirrel's twitch or a deer's breath gives her something concrete to solve when everything else is unsolvable. So by the time her name is almost drawn at that first reaping, the Capitol thinks it's selecting a random poor girl. In reality, it's about to conscript someone whose entire nervous system has been rehearsing the games for years. The real question is, what happens when you drop that survival machine into a spectacle designed to turn her into a symbol, and she refuses to play her assigned role? Attachment wounds. Why Katniss can't trust safety? To answer that, we have to start with something much quieter than a rebellion. We have to start with a little girl who learns that love disappears. Attachment-wise, Katniss is a nightmare for any system that runs on promises. She's somewhere between avoidant and disorganized. She craves connection, but her body has filed dependence under danger. Her father dies in an explosion. Her mother doesn't just grieve, she mentally exits the district. So Katniss's first big lesson is brutal. If you lean on people, they break, or they vanish. That part matters because it wires her attachment to say, don't need anyone, need them to be okay. You see it most clearly with Prim. She is fiercely attached, almost obsessively so, but always from the role of protector. She volunteers at the reaping. She takes beatings from peacekeepers to keep extra tesserae off Prime's record. She hunts every day so Prim never feels that gnawing hunger. But when does Prim ever see Katniss cry? When does she see her panic? Katniss will die for her, but she will not let Prim see her fear because in her mind, fear is contagious and lethal. So the relationship template becomes, I love you, therefore I must never burden you. Here's the real question. What happens when you put that template next to Gale and Peter? Over and over, she pushes both of them away emotionally at the exact moments she's risking everything to keep them physically safe. With Gale, she dodges conversations about the future, about marriage, about any promise that isn't purely strategic. With Peter, she treats the cave romance as a performance for sponsors, even when parts of it are clearly real. She can accept a shared plan, a shared hunt, a shared arena, but shared vulnerability, that feels more dangerous than the games. And there is a lot to uncover here, because being forced into the adult role at 11 doesn't just make her tough, it scrambles what love even means. For Katniss, love is responsibility, sacrifice, and constant vigilance. It's staying up all night listening for her mother's breathing after the mine explosion. It's tracking every sound in the woods because if she misses one rabbit, Prim might go hungry. Comfort, mutual support, being cared for, those are luxuries, not expectations. So when she becomes a victor and the Capitol hands her a mansion in Victor's village, at face value, it looks like the answer to every problem. No more hunger, no more peacekeepers at the door. Full pantry, hot water, a bed that isn't stuffed with straw. But this is where we talk about why she hates it. Safety, when it's handed to her, feels like a trap. If she's being kept, she's not protecting. If she's not protecting, who is she? Suddenly, the same system that abandoned her is offering comfort, appliances, status, even stylists fussing over her scars. And her trauma brain goes, what's the catch? Why now? Why me? We're going to cover how that suspicion collides with the Capitol's main strategy. Because if Katniss doesn't trust safety, what happens when the entire games around her are redesigned to sell her safety, comfort, and status? As long as she plays along. Survival brain versus moral brain. The reaping as a switch flip. Katniss is being handed comfort on a silver platter, but her brain is not wired for comfort. This is where we talk about the two systems fighting for control in her head, survival brain and moral brain. Survival brain is primitive. Fight, flight, freeze. It cares about the next 10 seconds, not the next 10 years. Moral brain is the opposite. It tracks values, long-term consequences, the relationship between your choices and who you become. And the reaping is the exact moment the Capitol flips Katniss from one to the other. Walk back into that square with her. At face value, it's a ceremony. Names, cameras, Effie's wig. But from Katniss's internal perspective, it's a firing squad. Her senses narrow. She's counting tesserae in her head, calculating odds already in that low-level life-or-death stress state she's been living in since her father died. That part matters because her survival brain has been training for years in the woods, reading every snap of a twig as a potential threat. Then Prim's name is called. Tunnel vision. Sound drops out. This isn't a noble cinematic pause. It's dissociation. For a second, Katniss freezes. Then the switch flips. She doesn't weigh pros and cons or think about rebellion. She doesn't think about the games at all. Her body moves before her moral brain catches up. She volunteers. Here's the real question. Is that bravery? Or is that attachment? Psychologically, it's closer to a reflex. Prim is her last safe person, the only real promise of softness in her world. Protecting that attachment figure is a survival act. For Katniss, keep Prim alive and stay alive are the same program. And that's her first major script break. The Capitol has spent decades teaching districts to stand still, accept the lottery, maybe cheer in those career districts where volunteering is about glory. They expect passivity or ambition. Katniss steps forward for neither. The system can read a tribute hungry for status. It cannot easily read a tribute whose only motive is, "My sister lives." The irony is that the games are built to drag her back into pure survival mode and keep her there. Hunger, fear, constant surveillance, the manufactured spectacle of the arena. Every design choice is about flooding the nervous system so completely that moral brain goes offline. People in that state are easier to predict. You know they'll run for the cornucopia. You know they'll hoard, betray, panic. But Katniss doesn't cooperate cleanly. Her survival brain is elite level. She can hunt, assess threats, form instant tactics, but her moral brain keeps intruding at the worst possible times. She honors Rue with flowers. She salutes District 11. She refuses to kill Peter even when the Capitol's rules say only one victor. None of that is optimal for staying alive in the narrow sense. So the central psychological tension becomes this: what happens when someone this good at surviving can't stop caring about other people? And what does the Capitol do when the very instincts they weaponize start generating choices that don't fit the script? We're going to cover how that tension turns every arena into not just a battlefield, but a moral experiment the Capitol is not prepared to control. From seam girl to spectacle, the Capitol's first mistake, so when that tension steps off the train and into the Capitol, you'd expect the system to smooth her out, right? Turn this rough-edged hunter from District 12 into another polished sacrifice. But here's the real question. What happens when the machine that's supposed to erase you accidentally makes you clearer than ever? Katniss's arrival in the Capitol is sensory assault. As policy, the colors are too bright, the food is too rich, the people are too loud. For a girl whose nervous system is calibrated to the sound of snapping twigs and distant mining blasts, this isn't luxury, it's threat. You watch her mentally check out as the prep team scrubs, peels, and plucks her. That's not makeover energy. That's a trauma response. Dissociation while your body is handled like an object. This is where we talk about objectification as a tactic. The Capitol strips tributes, shaves them, parades them. At face value, it's fashion and spectacle. Underneath, it's a psychological message. You are property. Your pain is content. Most tributes cope by leaning into the role they're given. You become the flirt, the brute, the clown. Anything to survive the gaze. And then there's Cinna. Quiet, controlled, and crucially, not laughing. Instead of building a mask, he builds a mirror. The girl on fire isn't some frilly costume, it's a weaponized version of what she already is. A hunter who walks into danger because her family's survival depends on it. A coal district tribute literally turned into a controlled burn. That part matters because it aligns the persona with her real survival identity, instead of overwriting it. Compare that to the Capitol's usual strategy. They turn tributes into caricatures. Glimmer the seductress, Marvel the golden boy, even Caesar Flickerman's endless stream of shallow brands. The promise is simple. Perform this role and maybe you die famous. Katniss's brand is different. It's rooted in competence, defiance, and raw, unpolished emotion. She's the girl who shoots an apple out of the game maker's pig, the girl whose anger leaks through even when she's smiling on command. Here's the reason that's so dangerous. When she walks in flames beside Peter, or twirls in a simple white dress that erupts into coal-blackened fire, It doesn't feel to her like a lie. It feels like camouflage that tells the truth. Less cognitive dissonance means she doesn't have to fight herself to perform. So when the games demand a spectacle, she can lean in without feeling owned by it. And the Capitol applauds. They cheer for a persona that is, accidentally, a rehearsal for revolution. Before she ever enters the arena, Katniss has already tested what it feels like to be seen, powerful, and cheered for her defiance on camera. The berries weren't the Capitol's first mistake. The first mistake was giving a traumatized survivor a stage and discovering she wasn't nearly as controllable as they hoped. The real problem comes when the performance stops being just a costume and starts bleeding into who the districts believe she actually is. The arena as a lab, how the games weaponize her instincts. So when the performance follows her into the arena, the Capitol thinks they've won. They've built their spectacle, dressed their girl on fire, dropped her into the death machine. But here's the real question. What happens when the arena accidentally feels like home? This first game's map isn't random. Forest, streams, hidden food sources, trees dense enough to climb and disappear into. For a kid from the seam, this isn't just scenery. It's muscle memory. The arena becomes an extension of the woods beyond District 12's fence, the place where she's rehearsed starvation, risk, and rule-breaking for years. That part matters because it means her survival brain doesn't have to learn new terrain under fire. It just switches locations. Back home, every trip under the fence is a low-budget version of the Hunger Games. You step wrong, you get whipped. Or worse. You fail to bring home food, your family starves. So when the cannon sounds and the games begin, Katniss isn't transforming into a new person. She's reverting to the oldest version of herself, the hunter who reads broken twigs, distant splashes, the rhythm of birds going silent, all those traits that made her difficult in the Capitol. Suddenly they're superpowers, hypervigilance, the constant scanning, the refusal to trust anyone's promise at face value. In a normal relationship, that's exhausting. In an arena where a rustle could be a career pack or a tracker-jacker nest. It's the reason she's still breathing. She sleeps in trees, she rigs snares, she treats every alliance offer as a potential trap. The Capitol designed the games to expose fear. Instead, they've handed fear's favorite student the perfect classroom. Look at her earliest choices. She ignores the cornucopia feast of weapons and runs. Not heroic, pragmatic. She aims for distance, water, and high ground because those are the three things that kept her alive in District 12. She forms no grand pact, no noble team-up. Even with Peter, her first instinct is suspicion. Is he protecting her or performing for the cameras? We're going to cover how often Katniss is read as a bold revolutionary in these moments, but tactically she's just doing what any poacher would. Avoid the spotlight, avoid the crowds, avoid the obvious kill zones. And the Capitol thinks they understand this archetype, the lone wolf. The tough, independent girl they can frame as gritty inspiration for bored viewers in the wealthier districts. Easy to market, easy to isolate, easy to control. The reason that reading fails is they underestimate two things: her buried capacity for attachment and her hair-trigger moral outrage when children suffer for adult power games. This is where we talk about Rue, because how does a brain wired for self-protection, for keeping everyone at arm's length, end up making the most emotionally dangerous alliance in the entire arena? Why does the hunter who avoids every tie suddenly risk everything for a 12-year-old from another district? There is a lot to uncover here, and Rue is where the Capitol's perfect arena stops being a lab and starts becoming a fuse. Rue, marvel, and moral injury. When survival starts to hurt, Rue is the moment the arena stops being a game board and turns into a moral crime scene. Up to this point, you can almost pretend it's hunting, strategy, sponsors. But here's the real question. What happens when survival demands you betray the part of yourself that kept you alive in the first place? This is where we talk about moral injury. Not just fear, not just PTSD, but the specific psychological damage that comes from being forced, under threat, under coercion, to act or fail to act in ways that violate your core values. The Capitol doesn't just threaten Katniss's body in the games, it corners her conscience. Every rule is designed so that compassion equals risk, and indifference equals safety. That part matters because Katniss isn't wired for indifference. Enter Rue, a 12-year-old from another district who whistles the same mockingjay notes Katniss's father taught her. She knows plants, she knows snares, she moves through trees with the same quiet competence. At face value, she's a useful ally, but the relationship doesn't stay tactical for long. Rue taps straight into Katniss's oldest role, protector of a small dark-haired girl who loves music. The arena accidentally hands her a second prim. You watch Katniss shift. With Rue, she shares food, shares songs, shares plans. She explains the Tracker-Jacker nest, teaches her about the career's supplies. We're going to cover survival, sure, but what's really happening is attachment under fire. The Capitol wanted alliances as drama. Instead, they resurrect Katniss's buried promise, I will keep you safe. That's a promise the games are structurally built to break. Then Marvel happens. Katniss doesn't stalk him for glory. She reacts to a scream and sees a spear in Rue's chest. Her arrow is a reflex to save a child, not a calculated kill. And the second he falls, she's horrified. She doesn't celebrate a point on the scoreboard. She doesn't reframe it as necessary. She stares at the boy she just killed and feels the weight of both bodies, his and Rue's. Survival doesn't shut off her moral brain, it tears it in half. Here's the pattern interrupt the Capitol never planned for. Instead of running, Katniss slows down. She sings to Rue. She talks to her. She arranges the flowers. In an arena optimized for efficiency kill, move, hide, she performs a funeral on live television. That's not strategy. That's psychological rebellion. She refuses to let Rue be content for the Capitol's highlight reel and insists on her humanity, petal by petal. And then the salute to District 11. On paper, it's a tiny gesture. In context, it's an accusation. She uses the cameras the way they were never meant to be used. Not to entertain, but to witness. The message is simple. Your child mattered, and the Capitol killed her. Why is that terrifying to Snow? Because it plants a seed. In the districts, that seed is outrage. In Katniss, it's realization. The arena can't just watch her. She can talk back. The games stop being a private nightmare and start becoming a public indictment. And once she learns that, the Capitol hasn't just created a victor, they've created a weapon who knows the cameras are loaded. The berries, a panic attack that broke a regime, they've created a weapon who knows the cameras are loaded. So what happens when that weapon's big revolutionary move isn't revolutionary at all? The Nightlock berries are treated as this stroke of genius the moment Katniss outplays the Capitol at their own games. But here's the real question. What if it's not strategy? What if it's a panic attack with a prop? To see that, you have to rewind to the rule change, the announcer's voice booming through the arena, promising that two tributes from the same district can win. That word matters. Promise. It gives Katniss a new script. Suddenly, keeping Peter alive isn't a liability. It's a path home. Her survival brain and her moral brain finally align for once. Protecting him means protecting herself, protecting Prim, protecting the fragile little unit she's built in her head. Then, the Capitol yanks it back. Rule revoked. One victor, after all. On paper, it's just a twist. At face value, it's more drama for the audience. But that part matters because psychologically, it's a betrayal layered on top of every other betrayal in her life. Father gone. Mother gone emotionally. District 12 abandoned by the capital until it's time to collect children. Now even the arena's rules, the one thing you're supposed to be able to count on in the games, turn out to be a lie. So where is Katniss mentally in that moment? She's starving, injured, sleep-deprived, and carrying fresh grief for Rue for every death she's witnessed up close. Her nervous system has been in fight or flight for days. She is not calmly running political calculations. She is cornered. Her body is screaming, "Don't kill Peter." Her history is screaming, "Don't trust the capital." There is a lot to uncover here, but the core is simple. Every option on the table feels like self-annihilation. This is where we talk about the berries. She doesn't suddenly become a master strategist. She becomes a trapped animal refusing the maze. If the only choices are murder the one person who's shown you unconditional care, or let him murder you, her brain does what it's always done in the seam when the rules made no sense. It cheats. The berries are not a manifesto, they're a refusal. If the game is rigged, she'd rather blow up the board than pick which part of her humanity to amputate. That's why she says, "Trust me," to Peter, but she's really talking to herself. Can she trust any world where those are the only choices? The capital reads this completely wrong. Snow and the game makers see cleverness, defiance, a calculated relationship stunt to win favor with the districts. In reality, it's the move of someone pushed past what her trauma-wired nervous system can tolerate. It's not, "How do I spark rebellion?" It's, "How do I stop this nightmare in the only way that still feels morally survivable?" So what happens when a regime built on predictability realizes its star victor doesn't even think in the categories they use to control people? When your symbol of hope isn't playing chess, she's just trying not to drown. We're going to cover what that does to Snow's entire strategy next. Victor's Village, the golden cage the capital built. So when Snow's chessboard stops working, he doesn't send more peacekeepers first. He sends a house. Winning the Hunger Games earns you a mansion in Victor's Village. At face value, it's the capital's dream package. Hot water, full cupboards, electricity that never cuts out. No more tesserae, no more empty belly sleep. For a girl who grew up in the seam counting every grain of salt, this should be paradise. But here's the real question. Why does a regime built on fear invest in comfort? Why build a luxury cul-de-sac for a handful of people in every district instead of just throwing extra rations at the winners and calling it a day? There is a lot to uncover here, because Victor's Village isn't a reward. It's a psychological tool. Start with the geography. In District 12, Victor's Village sits on a hill, separate from the soot and noise of the seam. You're elevated. You're visible, but you're not with your people anymore. That part matters because Katniss's entire nervous system is calibrated to the chaos of the hob, the crack of coal carts, the silence of the woods. That sensory environment is how she knows she's competent, useful, alive. Now she wakes up to quiet streets and manicured lawns. On paper, it's safety. In her body, it's exile. This is where we talk about attachment wounds colliding with architecture. Katniss lost her father in an explosion. Her mother disappeared into depression. She survived by becoming the provider, the hunter, the one who steps beyond the fence, so Prim doesn't have to. Her relationship to the woods is almost parental. The trees feed her when no adult will. Take that away, box her into a big empty house, and you haven't calmed her. You've stripped her of her coping mechanisms, and the house isn't actually empty. It's wired. Cameras, Phones straight to the capital. Peacekeepers at the edge of the lane. She can't go to the market without becoming a moving broadcast. She can't sneak under the fence without worrying what snow will do to the people she leaves behind. The games never end. The arena just has better plumbing. On top of that, there's guilt built into the floor plan. Her mother and Prim finally have medicine, heat, and food. Butter on bread. Hot baths. Meanwhile, the kids Katniss used to trade with still line up for Tesserae. Every time she opens a stocked pantry, it's a reminder. My family is safe because I played by their rules, and other children died. How do you relax in a bed you earned that way? Snow is betting the answer is eventually. He thinks comfort will sedate her, that the promise of never being reaped again will outweigh the nightmares. But Katniss doesn't trust safety that can be revoked with a phone call. So the village becomes a prettier arena, with Prim and Peter as living hostages. And that's the capital's second major miscalculation. They don't realize they've built their symbol of hope, a front row seat to ongoing suffering, then locked her in a gilded cage and told her to smile. So when they come back with the quarter quell announcement and aim the games at the victors themselves, what happens to that fragile illusion of reward? We're going to cover how Victor's village turns from golden cage into powder keg next. PTSD in the snow, nightmares, triggers, and a second reaping Victor's village was supposed to be the end of the story. You win, you move into the big house, you shut the arena door behind you. Except Katniss doesn't shut it. She can't. Her brain won't let her. This is where we talk about the games coming home with her. In Catching Fire, she's a textbook trauma survivor. She wakes up screaming from nightmares of mutts and fire. She can't sleep in her own bed. She's bolting upright with a bow in her hands before she's even fully awake. A falling plate hits the floor and she's on the ground, weapon drawn, before her conscious mind has caught up. That's exaggerated startle response. But in Panem, it just looks like the victor who's still dangerous. The forest, which used to be her one safe place, turns on her. At face value, it's the same trees, the same snare paths, the same mocking jays. But now every snapped twig is a cannon. Every rustle of leaves is a tribute in the underbrush. She goes hunting, and suddenly she's back on the bloodbath platform, bow shaking, unable to breathe. The smell of blood from a rabbit she's skinned? Instant flashback to Cato's screams and the boy she mercy kills in the arena. There is a lot to uncover here, because everyday stimuli are now tripwires. Her survival brain is running the show, dragging her back into the games, whether she's in the woods or at a Victor's Village dinner party. And then Snow shows up in her living room. That part matters because he doesn't threaten her with whips or peacekeepers first. He threatens her with Prim, with Gale, with her entire district. He looks at her PTSD and sees a tool. Here's the real question. What do you do to someone whose greatest fear is losing the people she kept alive by going into the arena? You tell her the only way to keep them breathing is to go back into performance mode. The girl on fire has to sell a new story now that her stunt with the berries was about love, not rebellion. So her trauma gets folded into propaganda. Every staged kiss with Peter is a hostage negotiation she's conducting in public. Then, the quarter quell announcement drops. Pattern interrupt. The one promise the system dangled in front of every district, win and you never go back, is revoked on live television. For Katniss, that's not just political, it's psychological betrayal. Her single coping fantasy, the thin thread of hope that the arena was a one-time hell, snaps. Safety isn't just rare, it's a lie the capital uses as bait. If the games can always reach you again, even as a victor, why pretend the relationship between you and the system is anything but predatory? So here's the question that sets up the rest of her arc. When someone already living in permanent survival mode is told there is no exit, no reward, no real future for the people she loves, What happens to her willingness to burn the whole thing down, and herself with it? We're going to cover how that shift from stay alive to take them with me turns Katniss from traumatized pawn into the Capitol's worst miscalculation. Love, threat, and control. Gale versus Peter in Katniss's mind. So when Katniss shifts from stay alive to take them with me, the next question is, who is she taking with her? Because the Capitol doesn't just trap her in the games, it traps her in a triangle. Not the romantic one the Capitol audience is obsessed with, a psychological one. On one side, you have Gale. At face value, he's the childhood friend, the hunting partner, the co-conspirator in the woods. But here's the real question. Why does Gale feel so inevitable to Katniss? He's the embodiment of her anger and her shared trauma. He knows the seam, the tesserae, the constant calculation of rabbit or squirrel means Prim eats tonight. When he talks about blowing up the Capitol, he's just saying out loud what her survival brain is already screaming. That part matters because being with Gale doesn't mean changing who she is. It means doubling down. The hunter, the rebel, the part of her that would rather go down fighting than ever owe the Capitol anything again. But the more Gale embraces violence, designing the double explosion traps, accepting civilian casualties in District 2, the more Katniss sees where that road actually leads. Does she become another weapon, just with a different flag painted on the side? On the other side, you have Peter, the boy with the bread, sure, but also the boy who keeps refusing the script. He throws her food when he's a child. He warns her about the careers in the first games. He tells the Capitol on live TV that she's pregnant to try to save her. Over and over, he chooses mercy over vengeance. He sees her as more than a victor, more than a symbol, more than a bow. So why is that terrifying? Because Peter represents safety and moral grounding, and safety is actually dangerous to someone with Katniss's avoidant attachment. If Gale threatens to pull her deeper into violence, Peter threatens her sense of control by offering unconditional care. He keeps saying in different ways, "You're worth saving," when her whole internal narrative is, "I'm the one who saves other people or they die." This is where we talk about why she keeps pushing both of them away. When Gale kisses her after the whipping, she shuts it down. When Peter wants to plan a future in Victor's village, she changes the subject. Intimacy means being seen, and being seen means someone might notice how broken she feels. But put either of them in physical danger, she runs into the fire every time, into the bloodbath to find Peter, into the whipping square for Gale. Love is easier when it looks like protection, when it can be framed as a tactical move in the games she understands. So this isn't a simple who will she choose love triangle, it's a triangle between three possible selves. Gale's world, where she is the hunter, Peter's world, where she is the girl who might someday be allowed to rest, and the Capitol's world, where she is the symbol, the mockingjay, owned by whichever side shouts the loudest. The real question is, when every path feels like surrendering a piece of herself, which version of Katniss survives the revolution, and which one the Capitol accidentally creates next? The Quarter Quell, turning victors into lab rats, and then the Capitol answers that question for her with the cruelest solution possible. They don't ask, which version of Katniss survives? They throw all of them back into the arena and see what breaks first. On paper, the third Quarter Quell is a clever twist. Reap only from existing victors. At face value, it's framed as tradition, a historical punishment for uprisings long ago. But here's the real question. Why target the most traumatized, most dangerous people in Panem and shove them back into the one environment guaranteed to reopen every wound on camera? This isn't random cruelty, it's targeted. It's taking people with nightmares and forcing them into a live-action replay. Finnick's torture, Johanna's rage, Haymitch's alcoholism, Those aren't side notes, they're symptoms the Capitol turns into content. You're not just watching a new games, you're watching PTSD being weaponized as both entertainment and intimidation for every district. For Katniss, this isn't just fear, it's moral injury squared. The first time, she could tell herself she was killing strangers to save Prim. Now she's ordered to hunt people whose interviews she's watched, whose scars match hers, whose victories were also promises of safety that the Capitol has just revoked. That part matters because it destroys the last shred of faith in the system. If victors can be recycled, no one is ever safe again. So how does she react inside that arena? Not as a strategist first, but as a damaged protector. There is a lot to uncover here. She doesn't warm up to alliances in theory, she flinches from them. She assumes traps, ulterior motives, more capital strings. But the second she sees vulnerability, Mags's age, Peter nearly dying over and over, her survival brain and her caretaker brain collide. She steps between danger and the people who remind her of Prim, even when it makes no tactical sense. This is where we talk about the way trauma makes her predictable, not in a cheap one-note way, but in a deeply patterned way. She will always move toward the person she fears losing most. By catching fire, that's Peter. Snow underestimates this, assuming her love story is just another Capitol performance. Plutarch doesn't. The rebels build an entire extraction plan around the expectation that when given a choice, she will aim every arrow, every decision, at keeping Peter alive. Why wire the arena to blow through the lightning tree? Why coordinate allies she's never fully briefed on? Because the rebels don't need her to understand the plan. They only need her to do what she always does: protect Peter at any cost, even if it means shooting an arrow into the sky instead of into a heart. The Capitol thinks the Quarter Quell will stabilize the games by reminding districts that rebellion ends in retribution. The rebels are running the opposite experiment. They're using the same psychological wiring, her fear, her guilt, her refusal to abandon one boy from her district, to turn the arena itself into the first battlefield of the revolution, shattering the games both literally and symbolically. And Katniss, in the center of it, still believes she's just trying to keep one person breathing. Fragmented identities. Katniss, the girl on fire, and the Mockingjay Katniss thinks she's just trying to keep one person breathing. But here's the real question. Who is the she that's doing the trying? Because privately, Katniss Everdeen is not the girl on fire. She's a girl who wants to hunt, trade at the hob, keep Prim fed, and then go home and sleep without the Capitol in her head. Her core self is small scale on purpose. She values that tiny circle of safety in District 12, the woods, the routine. No speeches, no crowds, no destiny. Just enough food and the promise that Prim won't be reaped. So why does that same girl end up in a flaming dress, twirling for cameras? This is where we talk about the first fracture, the girl on fire. At face value, that persona is pure Capitol spectacle, Cinna's design, Portia's styling, Caesar Flickerman's narrative. Glamorous, fiery, romantic. But that part matters because it isn't entirely fake. The fire works since it's built on something real. Her competence with a bow, her refusal to cry on command, the way she salutes District 11 when Rue dies. The Capitol thinks it's packaging a product. What it's really doing is amplifying her defiance. Then District 13 takes that same image and strips out the hesitation. Now she's the Mockingjay. No more awkward interviews, no visible panic attacks, no moral questions about who dies when the bombs fall. The Propos don't show her dissociating on the hospital floor. They show her walking through smoke as a rebel symbol. We're going to cover how that edit is psychological violence in itself. The Mockingjay is Katniss without doubt, without vulnerability, without the part of her that just wants to go home. So why does she go along with it? One reason is survival, but there is a lot to uncover here. Performing these roles actually gives her a buffer. If the girl on fire smiles in an interview, that's not Katniss lying, that's the persona doing its job. If the Mockingjay calls for war, she can tell herself the symbol is the one making promises to the districts, not the traumatized victor who still wakes up screaming from the first games. It's a psychological decoy. She pushes the pain onto the costume. Pattern interrupt. What happens when the costume never comes off? The more she's forced to perform, the more those boundaries blur. After 2 arenas, the Quarter Quell and the Invasion, you see her asking, again and again, who am I when the cameras are off? Is she the girl who can't kill Peter, or the Mockingjay who votes for one last symbolic games? That identity whiplash is not a quirk. It's a symptom. The fragmentation that once protected her becomes another wound, feeding into the breakdown we see in the aftermath and setting up the question of whether she ever gets to be just Katniss again. District 13, from one cage to another. So when she asks whether she ever gets to be just Katniss again, the answer District 13 gives her is brutal. No, you don't get a self, you get a schedule. District 13 is safety in the most technical, least humane sense. Underground corridors, grey concrete, grey meals, grey clothing with your job printed on your sleeve so you never forget your function. At face value, this is the opposite of the Capitol's excess. No colour, no spectacle, no games. But for a girl who regulates by slipping into the woods, by sky and wind and open space, this bunker is a sensory prison. Her survival brain can finally relax about bombs, but now her body is suffocating. You wake up when the screen on your wall tells you. You eat when it tells you. You shower when it tells you. Miss a block? You're publicly called out. That part matters because Katniss has spent years clawing tiny pockets of autonomy out of a hostile system. Here, even her coping mechanisms are contraband. No hunting, no wandering, no slipping past the fence. The relationship between her and authority doesn't become healthier, it just becomes more efficient. And then Coin and Plutarch step in. On paper, they're the resistance, the anti-Snow. But here's the real question. Why do their first interactions with Katniss sound so much like a Capitol production meeting? They script her appearances, they test catchphrases, they argue about wardrobe and backdrops. Plutarch literally says they need to shape the narrative. Coin ties her family's safety, Peter's rescue, even Gale's missions to whether she agrees to be the Mockingjay. It's Snow's old bargain all over again. Perform, and the people you love might live. For Katniss, there is a moment of relief in this. Finally, a clear enemy in Snow, a clear ally in Coin, and a simple story. We're the good district, they're the bad Capitol. Your job is to shoot arrows at cameras, and we'll handle the rest. We're going to cover this more later, but psychologically, that simplicity is a sedative. Her trauma brain craves binary choices. Kill or be killed. Protect Prim or fail. Trust Coin or lose Peter forever. Nuance is a luxury she's never had time for, but the cracks show fast. When she breaks script in the hospital bombing propos, that's the one Plutarch loves. Not because he suddenly respects her, but because raw, traumatized Katniss tests well with focus groups. This is where we talk about re-weaponization. 13 doesn't want her healed. They want her reactive. They want the girl who sang to a dying child and saluted a grieving district, because that version moves the needle in the war. So what happens when she realizes the good side also sees her as a tool? Her moral brain, the part that keeps asking why Rue had to die, why Prim had to be reaped, starts to notice there may be no authority worth surrendering to. If Snow and Coin both run their own games, Who do you shoot at first? And more dangerously, what do you do when the only way to protect anyone might be to burn the entire scoreboard? Propaganda girl. When the camera becomes a trigger, so when Coin's team points a camera at her and says, "Be the Mockingjay," it isn't just a costume change. It's a new arena. On paper, the propos should be simple. You put Katniss in front of a green screen, hand her a script, and roll. At face value, it's safer than the games. No mutts, no force fields, no cornucopia. But here's the real question. What happens when the rebellion starts treating her nervous system as a special effect? They don't just want words. They want that shaking voice, that glassy stare, the raw grief the Capitol already mined once. We're going to cover how manufactured that authenticity really is. Cressida drags her to ruined districts, stages shots in half-collapsed buildings, tells her, forget the cameras, just talk. But the reason she's there at all is because of the cameras. They recreate battlefield angles, push in on her face when she sees bodies, wait for the exact second her breathing changes. The crew is hunting for trauma the way Korea's hunted for blood in the arena. Only now, the weapon is a lens. And this is where we talk about the camera turning into a trigger. In the first games, being watched was background radiation. She knew the Capitol audience was always there, but she could pretend the trees were only trees. In District 13, the camera is up close, inches from her pupils. Every "take it again, that wasn't strong enough" is basically feel it harder, bleed better. She isn't just being observed, she's being harvested. Her pain is the resource the Cole pulled out of yet another district. Cressida and the crew start as polite predators. They're professionals. They have a mission. They need usable footage. But then they follow her into situations no director can fully control. District 8's hospital is the turning point. You watch Katniss walk through rows of burned, coughing people who still call her our Mockingjay, with this desperate hope. Then the Capitol bombs them. That part matters because the rage that explodes out of her on that rooftop isn't staged. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us, is not a line reading. It's a nervous system snapping. Pattern interrupt. The crew doesn't cut. They keep rolling. They capture her real breakdown and then package it. Overlay music, add the Mockingjay seal, broadcast it to every district. A most honest moment becomes a marketing asset. The relationship between feeling and performance is now completely blurred. Cressida shifts from exploiter to horrified witness, but the machine they feed doesn't care about that nuance. Psychologically, this has a cost. The more her genuine terror, love, and fury get weaponized, the less safe it is to feel anything at all. Why let yourself care about a hospital if that care will be edited into a war commercial? So she starts to dissociate. You see it in the way her eyes go distant after each propo, in the way she stiffens when the crew approaches. If every emotion can be turned into ammo, numbness starts to look like the only shield. And that sets up the next problem. What happens when your symbol needs to cry on command, but your brain has decided it can't afford tears anymore? Hijacked Peter. Love, fear, and the ultimate mind weapon. So when the tears dry up and Katniss's brain decides feelings are unsafe, the Capitol does something worse. It manufactures a feeling for her. This is where we talk about hijacked Peter as the Capitol's cleanest experiment in mind control. At face value, it's torture with a sci-fi twist. They inject him with Tracker Jacker venom, then pair images of Katniss with fabricated memories of pain and betrayal, over and over, until his survival brain rewires. She stops being the girl who handed him burnt bread in the rain. She becomes the monster in the dark. Why does that part matter? Because it isn't random cruelty. It's a psychological weapon built out of their relationship. The game's already trained Panem to read Katniss and Peter as a promise. If you play your role, if you sell the romance, maybe you live. Now the Capitol flips the script. Love is no longer a shield. It's the delivery system for terror. When Peter arrives in District 13, you watch Katniss's last illusion of safety crack. He doesn't just fail to recognize her. He attacks her, hands around her throat, eyes full of animal panic, body reacting to a threat his mind has been taught is real. And Katniss's first reaction isn't anger, it's horror and guilt. Of course it is, because here's the real question. What's more confirming to her core fear than the boy who always saw the best in her, now seeing a killer? Katniss has always believed she's dangerous to the people she loves. Her father dies, her mother collapses. Prim almost starves. The games then stack more bodies on that pile. Rue, Marvel, Cato, the Morphlings, Mags. Hijacked Peter is the Capitol holding up a mirror and saying, "You were right. You are the problem." And she believes it, at least on some level, because Trauma Brain is always asking, why else would this keep happening around me? We're going to cover how this forces a role reversal. Back in the first arena, Peter is the stable center. He's the one offering hope, diffusing tension, insisting there's a world beyond the games. Katniss is the volatile one, arrow first, questions later. Now, in 13 and on the Capitol mission, that dynamic flips. Peter is the unpredictable element, strapped to a pole, muzzled, restrained, because no one knows when the venom will spike and he'll try to kill her again. So Katniss has to make a new kind of calculation. Do you keep protecting someone who might be your executioner? Every time she chooses yes, it's an act of faith against the data her nervous system is collecting. And it's not romantic faith in the YA sense. It's stubborn, traumatized defiance. She refuses to let the Capitol define who Peter is, even when he's screaming that she's a mutt. If you zoom out, hijacked Peter is the Capitol's philosophy in its purest form. People are tools. Memories are editable. Love is just another battlefield you can mine for explosives. And the most terrifying part for Katniss, the weapon they built out of Peter proves one thing she can't unsee. Her existence can be turned against anyone at any time, whether she agrees or not. So where do you go from there when even your safest person has been rewired into a threat? You either stop caring altogether, or you decide to aim that terror back at the people who created it. Into the Capitol, the fourth arena, and the limits of endurance. So when Katniss steps into the Capitol, she isn't walking into liberation. She's walking into her fourth arena. On paper, the Star Squad is a combat unit. They're armed, armored, embedded near the front. But at face value is not how the Capitol, or Coin, does war. Their real mission is footage. They're a PR weapon moving through cleared zones so Cressida can film the Mockingjay dodging pods in perfectly framed chaos. You're not just watching soldiers, you're watching a live commercial for revolution. And here's the real question. What does that do to someone whose entire relationship with the games has been as both prey and product? Katniss is told she's a real soldier now, but she's also told she's too valuable to risk. She's ordered to follow Boggs, but also to perform for the camera. She's supposed to be lethal and safe, authentic and marketable. That double bind keeps her in the same psychological trap Snow built for her. Every move is both survival and spectacle. This is where we talk about cumulative trauma. By the time she hits the Capitol streets, Katniss is already deep in complex PTSD. She's numb one moment, hyper alert the next. Pods trigger intrusive memories of previous arenas. Every hidden mine or black ooze is another reminder that the Capitol's core promise never changed. The environment itself is the weapon. Pod after pod, she watches people die in ways that feel less strategic and more sadistic. And that part matters because it erodes the last illusion that any of this is about clean, honorable war. Boggs's death is a textbook moral injury. Here is the competent, decent commander who actually treats her as a person, not a symbol. He's killed by a booby trap designed more for cinematic horror than tactical gain. And his last act is to hand her the hollow and, essentially, the mission. The message? The system that keeps using her also just destroyed one of the only adults she could trust. And yes, someone is still rolling the cameras. Then the mutts take Finnick. It's not just gruesome, it's narratively cruel. A former victor, tortured and prostituted by the Capitol, finally fighting on the right side, only to be dragged under in a tunnel where his death can be turned into another heroic montage. Every sacrifice is pre-edited in Katniss's mind for how it will play on a screen she can't control. Why did he have to die there, that way, for whose story? So we're going to cover one more brutal shift. As her recklessness ramps up, lying about Coin's orders, charging towards Snow's mansion, what is she actually chasing? Justice? Revenge? Or just an end to decision-making altogether? After 4 arenas, does she even believe in justice as something the Capitol or District 13 can deliver? Or only as something she can personally enforce with an arrow? And when the next child dies in front of her, that question explodes into something much darker. Prim, bombs, and the shattering of Katniss's core story. That next child is Prim, and that detail is not a twist for shock value. It's the one move that hits the exact center of Katniss's psychology. Because if you trace every major decision she makes, from poaching in the woods at 11, to taking Tesserae, to volunteering at the Reaping, you keep landing on the same answer. Protect Prim. Feed Prim. Keep Prim out of the games. Her whole identity is built on that promise. She becomes a parentified child, a provider, a shield. When her father dies and her mother emotionally disappears, Katniss doesn't just step up. She rewrites her entire relationship to the world around. One rule: my suffering is acceptable if it keeps my sister safe. That part matters because it turns every later horror into something she can barely tolerate as long as Prim survives it. So when she's sprinting towards Snow's mansion and the hovercraft appears, you expect another standard Capitol atrocity. Children used as human shields, medics rushing in, and then the double-tap bombing. At face value, it's just more war. But here's the real question. Why does this particular explosion destroy Katniss in a way even 2 arenas couldn't? Because Prim is in that crowd. The games have finally reached the one person she thought she'd beaten them for. The girl she volunteered to save dies in an attack supposedly ordered by her own side, using Capitol-style parachutes. On Capitol children. That's a pattern interrupt not just in the plot, but in Katniss's core belief system. If District 13 can mirror the Capitol's tactics so perfectly that she can't tell who dropped the bombs, then who is she even fighting for? Psychologically, this is where we talk about shattered assumptions. Most of us walk around with 3 quiet beliefs. The world is basically predictable, good actions can protect the people we love, and suffering has some kind of purpose. Katniss has clung to all 3 in one very specific form. If she volunteers, if she endures the games, if she plays Mockingjay, then Prim gets a future. The double bombing annihilates that equation. Her actions don't protect Prim. Her sacrifices don't guarantee anything. The world is not predictable. It's arbitrary and cruel whether the order comes from Snow or Coin. There is a lot to uncover here, because once those assumptions shatter, you don't just lose hope. You lose the ability to accept any neat victory narrative at all. So when Coin starts talking about a new Hunger Games for Capitol children, Katniss is already past the point of being managed. You can't sell her a clean ending, a simple enemy, or a tidy moral. The real question for her is no longer who wins, but who keeps building arenas and calling it justice. And that's exactly the mindset she's in when she walks onto the execution balcony with one arrow and two presidents in her sights. Coin's proposal. New games, old logic. So when Coin walks in with her proposal for a symbolic Hunger Games, you're supposed to hear justice. Katniss hears an echo. Coin's plan is simple on paper and brutal in practice. One final edition of the games, limited, controlled, using the children of the capital elite as tribute. Not a random reaping this time, but targeted retribution. The capital's old ruling class will finally feel the fear they exported to every district for 75 years. At face value, it sounds fair. Eye for an eye, arena for an arena. But here's the real question. Fair to whom? Politically, Coin is playing 3 moves ahead. She gives the districts a blood price, a public spectacle that says, "See? We didn't just forgive them. It's rebranding the same games as a righteous purge, a way to bind angry victors and grieving parents to her new regime, with the promise of revenge." That part matters because it shows you Coin understands the crowd's psychology. She just doesn't understand Katniss's. For the people who never went into an arena, symmetry feels satisfying. One capital child for one district child. Balance restored. But for Katniss, whose survival brain has been trained to scan for traps, this isn't closure, it's recursion. There is a lot to uncover here because her entire moral injury comes from being forced to participate in a system that kills children and then tells her it's necessary. Coin is offering the same system with a new coat of paint. And then we get the victor vote scene. You're in that room with the surviving victors, the last people on Earth who should ever be asked to authorize more games. Coin calls for a vote. Do we approve this symbolic addition or not? The camera lingers on Katniss's face, unreadable, detached. When she says "for Prim" and votes yes, the whole relationship between her and the rebellion snaps into focus and then immediately blurs again. Is she playing along? Is she breaking? Both readings are possible, and that's the point. This is where we talk about moral injury. Katniss has already watched Rue die in her arms, already carried the guilt of Marvel, of the morphlings of every nameless child whose death funded a victor's crown. The idea of putting any children, capital, district, it doesn't matter, back into an arena confirms her worst fear. The games didn't end. They just changed managers. The logic has infected the new leadership. Snow used arenas to terrify the districts into obedience. Coin wants to use one to cement her own power. So what does Katniss's survival brain do when it realizes both presidents are operating off the same script? When justice and tyranny start using the same vocabulary, she's cornered between 2 versions of the games, with one arrow and one chance to decide who actually dies on that balcony. And once you see it that way, her final choice stops being a twist and starts reading as the only move she thinks might actually end the arenas for good. The arrow at Coin, the only move she could make. Up on that balcony, everyone thinks they know what Katniss is about to do. Snow kneeling, Coin waiting, the crowd chanting for blood. At face value, it's simple. You shoot the old tyrant, you crown the new one. Roll credits. But here's the real question. What is actually running through the mind of a girl whose entire nervous system has been trained by the games to see traps where other people see closure? Start with the math. Snow is already dying. She can hear it in his coughing, see it in the blood on his lips. Whether she shoots him or not, his story ends in days. Coin's story is just beginning. Coin is the one proposing a symbolic new Hunger Games with capital children, and she's doing it in the same calm tone Snow used to promise, a little hope to the districts. That part matters because Katniss has heard this script before. Different president, same vocabulary. And then there's Prim. Prim's death isn't an abstract casualty for her, it's the core wound of her entire relationship to the world reopening. The games took her father, then her childhood, then Rue, then Finnick. Now the bombing of the children's hospital takes the one person she volunteered for in the first place. When she realizes Snow is probably right, that Coin ordered those parachutes, her brain does something it almost never does. It aligns. For once, the survival brain and the moral brain are pointing at the same target. If she kills Snow, she protects no one. The games get a rebrand, a fresh coat of revolutionary paint, and future children grow up under a president who just tested mass murder on them. If she kills Coin, she might die on the spot, but she shatters the illusion that this new regime is clean. The only way to protect hypothetical future kids, including the ones she still can't even imagine having, is to break the cycle at its source, even if that source is on her side. This is where we talk about agency. Both regimes have tried to weaponize her as a symbol. The girl on fire, the Mockingjay, the dutiful assassin executing Snow on command. Coin is literally staging this execution as propaganda, planning to parade Katniss as the face of a new, slightly kinder games. By turning the arrow, Katniss refuses the role. She refuses the story. She refuses to legitimize Coin's victory narrative with her own hand. And the second the arrow lands, she steps completely outside the script. Her immediate instinct? Nightlock. Again, her first great act of rebellion in the arena was a double suicide attempt. Her first act after killing Coin is to reach for the same exit. That's not theatrics. That's complex PTSD and moral injury boiling over. She cannot imagine a self that exists outside being used by the Capitol, by District 13, by anyone. If she can't belong to them, her brain tells her she can't belong anywhere. But the capsules fail, she survives, and her mind collapses. In that breakdown, you see the Capitol's greatest mistake fully mature. They built a weapon whose entire identity was shaped around protecting one fragile promise. Prim stays safe, and then they broke it. The result is a victor who refuses to belong to anyone, who would rather torch the board than keep playing the games. So what happens when a system loses control of the symbol it created, and that symbol has to figure out who she is without an enemy to shoot at? After the fire, complex PTSD and the quiet ending, so what happens when the war ends, the target is gone, and the girl who only knew how to aim has to wake up without an enemy? This is where we talk about Katniss after the fire. Not the Mockingjay, not the victor, just the 20-something in a half-burned house in District 12, wandering through the ruins of the games in her own head. Clinically, what she's living with is complex PTSD. Not a single bad event, but years of stacked trauma. Her father's death, near starvation, parenting her own mother, 2 arenas, the Quarter Quell, the firebombing of her district, Prim's death, and the Capitol invasion. Complex PTSD isn't just flashbacks, it's emotional whiplash, a warped self-concept, chronic guilt, and relationships that feel dangerous even when they're kind. You don't think you survived, you think you failed in a way that can't be fixed. So when she comes back to the ruins of District 12, what does she do? Nothing. For a long time, she drifts through Victor's village, starves herself, curls up on stairs and floors. That catatonia isn't laziness. It's her nervous system hitting the brakes after years of red alert. Her brain has been trained that every movement is a potential death sentence. No arena means no script. No script means freeze. Here's the real question. How do you heal when your entire identity was built around keeping one person alive, and she's gone. For Katniss, the answer is painfully small, sensory, almost animal, routine. She cleans, she hunts, she plants. She and Greasy Say rebuild tiny rituals: soup on the stove, coal dust on boots, the sound of geese on the lake. We're going to cover epic rebellions and political symbolism elsewhere, but this part matters because the story quietly shows trauma recovery as repetition, not revelation. Her body has to relearn that walking into the woods now means rabbits and dandelions, not mutts and mines. And then there's Peter. At face value, you can read their ending as a triangle finally resolving. Gale exits, Peter wins. But that's the wrong frame. The real question isn't who she chooses, it's who can sit with the crater in her mind without demanding she fill it. Peter shares her history, but he chooses gentleness in a world that taught them both to be weapons. He doesn't need her to be a symbol, a leader, or even stable. Their relationship works because he can hold the games in his own memory without using them against her. Her ambivalence about children is the clearest tell that the games never really end. It takes years for her to agree, and even then she admits she dreads the day she has to explain what the arenas were. Motherhood isn't a reset. It's another arena where the old fear, "they'll reap what I love," lurks behind every sunny afternoon. So no, this isn't a neat happily ever after. It's a trauma survivor building a quiet, slightly crooked life in the smoking crater the Capitol left in her. The rebellion wins, the games stop, but the question that hangs over the next generation, what do we do with this history, is exactly where her story leaves us. Book Katniss versus movie Katniss, what changes in her mind? And here's where adaptation really messes with your head. On the page, you don't just watch Katniss live with that history, you inhabit it. Book Katniss is almost claustrophobically interior. Every scene is filtered through her hyper-vigilant, judgmental, often confused thoughts. You feel her scanning every room for exits, cataloguing every weak spot in a relationship, second-guessing every promise. You're inside the survival brain, hearing the moral brain argue back. On screen, you mostly see her face. At face value, that sounds faithful. Jennifer Lawrence frowns, flinches, cries. But here's the real question. What gets lost when the constant, messy narration turns into a close-up and a music cue? There is a lot to uncover here because the books make Katniss's trauma and moral conflict explicit, while the films smooth some of that into strong, quiet heroine energy. This is where we talk about calculation versus reaction. Book Katniss is always running numbers in her head. How much food, how much risk, how much the Capitol will punish District 12 if she does X instead of Y. When she decorates Rue's body with flowers, she is grieving, but she's also consciously sending a message to the game's audience and wondering how far she can push before Snow retaliates. The movie keeps the gesture and the emotion, but trims the internal debate, so it reads more as pure heart than dangerous strategy. Same thing with her mother. In the books, her anger is sharp and sustained. She remembers the catatonic withdrawal after her father's death, the way an 11-year-old had to become the family's provider. And she repeatedly thinks, she left us. That part matters because it shows a child who has learned, brutally, that adults cannot be trusted. The films show tension, sure, but they don't linger on the resentment that shapes every decision Katniss makes about attachment and dependence. And then there's the really dark layer, her explicit suicidal ideation. In Catching Fire and Mockingjay, Book Katniss thinks in concrete terms about dying as an exit ramp from the Capitol's control, planning to eat the nightlock, imagining stepping in front of a peacekeeper's gun, fantasizing about not having to be the Mockingjay anymore. The movies gesture at despair, but they rarely let you sit in the thought. She doesn't actually want to survive this, because that's a harder sell for a blockbuster protagonist. So why the shift? The films tilt her closer to a traditional hero archetype: reactive emotion, clean moral beats, clear hope. The books keep her firmly in traumatized teenager territory, making impossible choices with incomplete information and a brain rewired by the games. Which version you meet first changes everything. Are you watching a brave protagonist who rises to the occasion, or a case study in state-induced trauma who accidentally becomes a symbol? And as we move into the next section, we're going to cover how the Capitol's propaganda machine leans into that movie version, while the real Katniss, the book Katniss, keeps slipping out of their script. Not a hero in her own mind. Guilt, blame, and self-perception. So here's the twist the Capitol never advertises. Their big revolutionary hero does not think she's a hero at all. If anything, Katniss Everdeen walks through this story convinced that survival is her one unforgivable crime. This is where we talk about guilt as gravity. From the second Rue dies in her arms, Katniss starts building a mental list of bodies she thinks orbit her. Rue, obviously. Marvel because she shot him even though he'd just speared a 12-year-old. Every other tribute she outlives in that arena because the games force a victor to exist on top of a pile of children. Then it widens. Cinna, beaten to death after dressing her as the Mockingjay. Finnick, torn apart in the tunnels on a mission that only exists because of her. And Prim. Always, ultimately, Prim. At face value, you and I can say, well, she didn't drop the bombs. She didn't order the executions. But here's the real question. Why does Katniss feel like she did? Trauma survivors have this nasty habit of overestimating their responsibility for events they could never control. Psychologists call it moral injury, when your brain decides, if I had been better, smarter, faster, they'd still be alive. Katniss has been trained into that thinking since age 11. Her father dies, her mother disappears into grief, and the family's survival becomes a rigged game she's suddenly responsible for winning. If she doesn't hunt, they starve. If she doesn't trade, they freeze. The relationship between her choices and life or death gets wired way too directly. So when she enters the arena, the logic scales up. If she moves wrong, Rue dies. If she rebels wrong, Cinna dies. If she becomes the Mockingjay at all, innocents across every district die. Watch how often she rejects the hero label. Haymitch says she's the face of the rebellion. She snaps that she never asked for it. Plutarch pitches her as the Mockingjay. She answers with conditions that are basically, fine, but only if you save Peter and the others. Because she sees herself as a bargaining chip, not a leader. Over and over she frames herself as a piece in their games. First snows, then coins. When things get unbearable, she doesn't fantasize about ruling Panem. She fantasizes about disappearing into the woods with Gale, or into some anonymous safe house where nobody can use her again. Then Prim dies, and everything crystallizes. The one person she volunteered to protect is killed by a strategy executed in her name, using her symbol. That part matters because it fuses her oldest fear, I'm dangerous to the people I love, with the rebellion itself. In her mind, her existence is a loaded weapon the Capitol and the rebels keep grabbing. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core reason it matters is this. The Capitol's greatest mistake wasn't just creating a symbol. It was building that symbol out of someone who never believed she deserved to survive, let alone be celebrated. And when your hero secretly thinks she belongs with the dead, what happens the moment she turns that judgment back on the new regime? What if Katniss never volunteered? The system without its glitch. So let's pull the thread on that question and do something the story never fully shows you. What if Katniss never raised her hand? In this version, Prim walks to the stage shaking, No volunteer, no gasp, no girl on fire, just another terrified 12-year-old from a starving district the capital already wrote off as background noise. At face value, the games proceed exactly how Snow wants. Prim dies early, probably in the bloodbath, and the cameras move on before you've even learned her face. District 12 grieves, but quietly, because that's what 12 always does. The Seam kids still go to the fence. Gale still rants about the system, but there is no televised spark, no shared symbol to rally around. The capital gets what it always expected from 12: compliance, coal, and 2 anonymous bodies a year. Here's the real question. Could someone else have done what Katniss did? Could another tribute have turned the arena into a moral indictment instead of a spectacle? Maybe you're picturing a career from 1 or 2 staging a dramatic stunt, or a soft-spoken orchard worker from 11 who befriends a child and honors her when she dies. The problem is the relationship each of those kids has with the games is different. Careers are raised to see the arena as a test, almost a promotion track. Their districts celebrate them. The promise is clear: win, and you become a victor, a minor celebrity with better housing and food. That part matters because it shapes their empathy. They can mourn, sure, but they're trained to see other tributes as obstacles, not as children the capital is murdering. On the other side, a quiet outlier from 11 might have Rue's gentleness, or Thresh's fury, but not Katniss's specific mix of parentified responsibility and rule-breaking survival skills. Remember, Katniss has spent years poaching, calculating risk, and making impossible choices to keep Prim alive. Her brain is already wired to protect one person at any cost, then hate herself for the compromises. So when she decorates Rue's body with flowers or threatens double suicide with the berries, she isn't doing propaganda math, she's doing trauma math. The capital accidentally trained a hyper-competent, hyper-traumatized protector, then put a camera on her and told her to improvise. We're going to cover this more later, but rebellion in Panem was probably inevitable. The districts are too exploited, the tesserae system too cruel, the victor's village promised too hollow. Someone, at some point, was going to push back. But without Katniss, it doesn't become the Mockingjay. It doesn't become a dual arena story, where the same girl survives 2 games and then assassinates the new president at her own execution. This is where we talk about systems and outliers. The capital's whole design, reapings, victor tours, propaganda, runs on averages, on the assumption that most people will break in predictable ways. But there is a lot to uncover here, because every reaping is a dice roll. Sometimes you get a malleable victor. Sometimes you get a traumatized symbol who refuses both Snow and coin. So what does Panem's revolution look like if the system never rolls Katniss Everdeen at all? And who steps into the void her absence leaves? The capital's design flaw: hope, fear, and unintended consequences. So if the reaping is a dice roll, what exactly is the capital gambling on? They're not just betting on who survives, they're betting on how much hope they can safely manufacture without burning the whole system down. This is where we talk about President Snow's most important line in the entire franchise. Sitting in his rose garden, he tells Seneca Crane, "Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous." At face value, that sounds almost generous. The dictator who understands you need something to live for. But here's the real question. What kind of hope is he actually selling? Snow's answer is the Hunger Games themselves. The arenas, the parades, the victor's village on the hill. The promise is simple. You can't change the district, but maybe your child can escape it. Maybe your grain or coal or textile district finally gets a festival, extra food, a new roof for the school. The hope is individual, not collective. Personal, not political. That part matters because it reroutes every why away from revolution and toward the games. You don't ask, why does the capital rule us? You ask, why didn't our tribute train harder? Victor's village is the architectural version of that psychological trick. You can see it. You can walk past the empty mansions. Your kids can point at them. But you can't touch them unless you win the games. It keeps fear and hope in a tight relationship. Fear of being reaped. Hope of being the one person it works out for. And for decades, it functions. The careers volunteer. The districts play along. The system keeps breathing. Then the capital rolls Katniss Everdeen. Her survival breaks the calibration. Because Katniss doesn't just win, she cheats the premise. The berries don't say, maybe my kid will be the victor. They say, maybe the games themselves can lose. Rue's flowers, the District 11 salute, refusing to kill Peter. Those moments turn the arena into a question mark. If a traumatized girl from the poorest district can force the capital to rewrite the rules once, why not again? Why not forever? Snow sees the danger, but misreads the scale. His fix is to terrorize her into being a symbol of compliance. Coin does the mirror image. She tries to weaponize the Mockingjay hope without letting it threaten her own future presidency. Both believe they can harness this fire and still stand in the center of the room when the smoke clears. They're wrong because Katniss is too much hope in one person, not optimistic hope, but dangerous, corrosive, this shouldn't exist hope. Her story says the quiet part out loud. If one girl can break the games, maybe the games were never inevitable at all. And once you start asking that, how long before you ask the same about Snow, or Coin, or any capital at all? So what happens when the symbol of hope refuses to stay symbolic and starts making her own choices? Katniss's case study, what her story teaches about real-world power. So what happens when the symbol of hope refuses to stay symbolic and starts making her own choices? Here's the real question. Why does that feel so dangerous, not just in Panem, but in our world too? Because Katniss isn't just a character. She's a case study. The games are an exaggerated arena, sure, but they're built out of real patterns you see whenever a powerful system discovers a traumatized teenager and realizes they can be turned into a weapon, a warning, or a brand. Think about child soldiers, for example, or the way certain miracle survivors are pushed onto talk shows to sell the promise that the system works if you just try hard enough. At face value, it looks inspirational. Look, a victor from a poor district, a success story after unthinkable violence. But this is where we talk about why power structures keep reaching for the same kind of person. Someone already hurt, already scared, already convinced they owe their survival to the people in charge. Trauma does two opposite things at once. It makes you more controllable and more explosive. The capital leans hard on the first part. Katniss grows up with her father blown apart, her mother emotionally gone, her entire relationship to the world filtered through hunger and fear. That part matters because it sets up a survival brain that is primed to respond to threats, to authority, to guilt. When Snow shows her footage of Gale being whipped, when Coin dangles Prim's safety, they are betting on the same thing, that she'll fold into compliance to keep one person alive. But then there's the second part, moral injury. The moment when what you've done or seen is so wrong that you can't play along with the story anymore. That's Rue's death. That's the salute to District 11. No one told Katniss, hey, create a nationwide act of defiance. She just can't leave Rue's body as spectacle. So she decorates it, humanizes, turns the cameras against their own script. And that's where media comes in. The games are a 24/7 broadcast, suffering as entertainment. You're supposed to pick favorites, place bets, cry at the right moments. We're going to cover how often our own media does the same thing, turning real-world pain into ratings. But notice what Katniss keeps doing, insisting on names, on rituals, on grief that doesn't fit the Capitol's neat narrative arc. She keeps breaking the edit. Here's the trap we fall into on the outside, romanticizing that, saying trauma made her strong. The story is much colder. Trauma made her useful. Useful to Snow as a frightened pawn. Useful to Coin as a marketable mockingjay. Every time she becomes a more effective symbol, her internal life gets worse. Nightmares, hypervigilance, numbness. The cost doesn't disappear just because the revolution wins. So the next time you see a hero constantly on camera, ask, who picked them? Who writes their script? And who, like Katniss, becomes dangerous only when they stop reading from it? Reframing Katniss from chosen one to engineered error, because here's the twist the Capitol never planned for. The more they script Katniss, the less she fits in any script at all. On paper, she's a perfect product of their world. In practice, she's the system's own recall notice walking around with a bow. Think about her full arc. You start with a parentified child in District 12, hunting at 11 because the main adult in her life emotionally checks out after her father's death. That part matters because it wires her brain for two things the Capitol both needs and fears: hypervigilance and responsibility that borders on self-erasure. Her whole attachment style becomes, I will keep you alive, but don't you dare try to keep me safe. Drop that person into the arena, and you don't get a wide-eyed tribute. You get a hyper-competent survivor whose threat detection is already turned up to 11 before the games even start. At face value, she's the Capitol's dream victor, skilled, telegenic, easily packaged as the girl on fire. But here's the real question. What happens when your most efficient killer also refuses to kill for spectacle? We're going to cover how every phase after that just pushes her further out of control. As a morally injured victor, she comes home with classic trauma responses: insomnia, flashbacks, numbness. The Capitol's reward is Victor's village, Peter's survival, a steady stream of fame. Each one is supposed to buy compliance. Instead, each one collides with those core traits. Fame amplifies her distrust of authority. The mansion isolates her hypervigilance in an empty neighborhood. Saving Peter weaponizes her fierce protectiveness against the Capitol's own narrative. By the time she's a fragmented symbol, the girl on fire, the star-crossed lover, the reluctant mockingjay, and the private self only Prim and Peter really know, her identity is less a character and more a glitching broadcast. The Capitol, and then District 13, keep changing the channel on who she's supposed to be. Her brain, already running on survival mode, responds the only way it knows how: reject any version of safety that rests on someone else's suffering. This is where we talk about engineered error. Katniss isn't a random exception who slipped through the cracks. She's what you get when you expose a certain kind of mind. Parentified, hyper-responsible, wired for protection, to repeated escalating trauma inside a televised punishment ritual. The reason she keeps breaking the script isn't destiny. It's that the script keeps demanding she betray the one rule her entire psyche is built around. Prim, Peter Rue, the nameless kids in every district must not be disposable. So when she ends as an exhausted survivor, not a triumphant heroine, that's the point. The Capitol did crush her. The revolution did use her. And yet, precisely because she is broken, she becomes unusable for any stable regime. Reading the trilogy this way shifts everything. It stops being a story about fate choosing a savior and becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when power treats human beings as game pieces and accidentally programs one of them to flip the board. And if the board can flip once, the next question is obvious. How many other errors are already in motion? Your turn in the arena. Questions to take with you so when you stop seeing Katniss as the hero and start seeing her as the Capitol's most traumatized employee of the month. What changes for you? Does she feel more inspiring or more horrifying, or both at once? Here's the real question. If you put trauma survivor first on her character sheet and victor second, does her entire relationship to the games read differently in your head? Suddenly, the girl who volunteers for Prim isn't a destined savior. She's a parentified 16-year-old who has already been keeping her family alive since she was 11. Does that make her choices feel more inevitable or more unfair? Think back through the story. Which scenes hit differently now that you're watching her survival brain and not just her plot armor? Rue's funeral, for example. At face value, it's a beautiful act of rebellion. But when you re-watch it, do you see a teenager compulsively trying to restore dignity to a child's body because she still hasn't processed her father's death? That part matters because it shifts the reason from symbolic move to uncontrollable trauma response. Same with the berries. Is that a clever stunt? Or a cornered animal refusing to play the Capitol's game for one more second? When she shoots coin, are you reading it as a grand political statement, or as a hyper-vigilant brain spotting one more predator on the balcony and reacting faster than any council vote ever could? And then there's Victor's village, the empty houses, the silence, the hunting trips where she slips under the fence just to breathe. When you re-enter those scenes, do you notice how often her body is braced for threat even in a safe mansion? Pay attention to her hands, her posture, the way she positions herself near exits. If you're rereading the books, track her internal monologue. How many thoughts are about danger and how many are about values? Prim, Peter, Rue, her district. That tiny promise of hope she keeps trying to protect. Here's a challenge for your next watch or read through. Every time Katniss makes a decision, pause and ask, is this coming from fear or from what she believes is right? Survival brain or moral brain? When she volunteers, when she sings to Rue, when she hides in an empty village house after the fence goes live, what's really driving her in that moment? And here's the pattern interrupt. What if Katniss isn't even the Capitol's only mistake? This is where we talk about the others. Haymitch, the drunk who remembers every face he couldn't save. Johanna, who weaponizes rage because everything she loved was taken. Finnick, turned into a commodity and then into a confession bomb on live TV. Which of them do you think is the most dangerous error in the Capitol's code? So as we move toward wrapping up, I want you in the arena with us. Drop into the story again, re-watch, reread, and bring these questions. Because the next step is clear. If Katniss is what happens when one game piece flips the board, who should we dissect next? If you survived this deep dive, join the village. So if Katniss is the game piece that flips the entire board, here's the real question. What did the Capitol miscalculate so badly that their own system manufactured its destroyer? At face value, the games were simple. You terrify the districts, you dangle a victor, you build a shiny house in Victor's village, and you keep everyone trapped between fear of the arena and hope for that one mansion on the hill. But Katniss breaks that math. The same trauma that should have made her obedient instead makes her uncontrollable. We've watched how that starts way before the reaping. Her father dies in an explosion. Her mother emotionally disappears, and suddenly a child in District 12 is acting as parent, provider, and protector. That part matters because it forges a survival brain that never turns off. She hunts illegally, calculates risk every time she steps under the fence, and learns one core rule: no one is coming to save you. So when the Capitol throws her into the games, they're not creating her fear, they're weaponizing the fear that's already been living in her nervous system for years. This is where we talk about the split between survival brain and moral brain. The arena is designed to make you choose the kill shot over your conscience. But Katniss keeps glitching that script. She honors Rue with flowers instead of moving on. She salutes District 11. She refuses to kill Peter even when the rules say only one victor. Those aren't clean, heroic decisions. They're messy, trauma-shaped reactions where her attachment wounds and her sense of justice collide. And the Capitol's response? Turn her into a brand. The girl on fire, the star-crossed lover, the mockingjay. We're going to cover how each identity is a costume layered on top of a terrified coal miner's kid who just wants her sister safe. Her public self, her arena self, the private self only Prim and Peter see. Those fragmented identities are classic complex PTSD territory. Nightmares, guilt, hypervigilance, emotional numbness across 4 different games environments, from the first arena to the Capitol invasion. The Capitol thinks that if they can script the relationship between Katniss and the audience, they can control the outcome. But the more they push, the more her trauma stops caring about the promise of safety. That's the irony. They built an entire system on managed hope and calibrated fear, and then created someone whose nervous system doesn't respond to their rewards the way it's supposed to. So if you want to stay in this world, if you want more Panem deep dives on other victors, other districts, the mechanics of the arena, the truth behind Victor's Village, stay in the Victor's Village with us. We're turning every corner of these games over until the pattern shows itself. I want to hear from you. Which moment in Katniss's story feels the most psychologically real to you? Is it her dissociation in the hospital? Her rage at Coin? That quiet scene with the cat in the ruins of District 12? Or tell me which character you want dissected next. Haymitch's learned helplessness, Snow's relationship with purity and poison, Finnick as weaponized beauty. Because in Panem, it's never just the big speeches that break a system. It's a handful of berries, a cheap metal pin, a girl deciding just once not to shoot the boy in front of her. The Capitol taught us that the smallest choices can rewrite the biggest games, and that's why we keep coming back to these stories. Bonus, Katniss's coping mechanisms you might have missed. So if the smallest choices can rewrite the biggest games, here's the real question. What tiny choices is Katniss making just to stay intact? This is where we talk about her coping mechanisms, not the big fiery speeches, the small, almost throwaway moments the camera glides past. Because Katniss isn't walking through Panem as a stable hero. She's a traumatized teenager running constant damage control on her own nervous system. Start with her senses. Watch what happens every time the world gets too loud. In the arena, when the bloodbath erupts, she locks onto the bow in her hands. The weight, the pull of the string, the thud of arrows hitting trees. In District 12, she does the same thing with the woods, the crunch of leaves, the rough bark under her fingers, the smell of pine and damp earth. Even Prim's singing becomes a kind of auditory anchor. She's not just appreciating the moment, she's grounding herself so she doesn't disappear into panic. At face value, those shots of her fingers tracing moss or adjusting her grip on the bough just look cool and competent. But that part matters because they're the survival brain version of breathe in, breathe out. Her body is dragging her back into the present whenever the past, her father's death, the mine, the first games, tries to flood in. Then you have the dark humor. Katniss is not a naturally jokey person, so when she does go sarcastic, it's a tell. With Haymitch, she meets his cruelty with deadpan lines about how delightful he is, or promising to try not to die so it doesn't inconvenience him. With Effie, she slices through Capitol absurdity with flat, brutal honesty that almost plays as comedy. Underneath, fear, humiliation, and the terror of being turned into a costume. The bite in her humor is a shield. If she can make the situation ridiculous, it has less power to crush her. We're going to cover another big one: routine. When the world spins out, Katniss retreats into tasks: hunting, checking snares, cleaning weapons, braiding Prim's hair in the mornings. None of that is random. Routine gives her a closed system with clear rules and immediate feedback. You hunt, the family eats. You braid Prim's hair, she walks into the day looking cared for. In a district and a capital that break every promise, these small repeatable actions restore a sense of cause and effect. And notice how often she physically pulls away when emotions get intense. Peter confesses his feelings. She looks down, away, finds something to fiddle with. Gale presses her about their relationship in the snow. She turns, moves, puts space between them. Even in Victor's village, when people try to thank her, she dodges eye contact, steps back, or literally escapes to the woods. Avoiding being seen too clearly is its own coping strategy. Because if someone really sees her, they might see the guilt, the anger, the belief that she's not a hero, just a weapon the Capitol forged and lost control of. So on your next rewatch, track these small behaviors: the sensory focus, the barbed sarcasm, the rituals, the flinches and retreats. Why does it matter? Because once you start reading those tells, the whole story shifts from girl on fire versus evil Capitol to a much harder question. What does surviving this system actually cost her? And who is she when the games finally end? And that leads us straight into the next layer: how the Capitol keeps trying to script those very coping mechanisms into their propaganda, and why that backfires. Bonus: how different districts would read Katniss if the Capitol keeps trying to script Katniss. The districts are doing something even more dangerous. They're reading her. This is where we talk about point of view. You're stuck in Katniss's head, hearing her insist she's not special, not a hero, just a girl trying to keep her sister alive. But here's the real question: what does that same behavior look like from the outside, from people who only see the broadcasts and the edited games? Start with Districts 1 and 2, the career corps. To them, the games are a profession, almost a religion. You train, you volunteer, you win, you become a victor, and that proves the whole system is fair. Then a hungry girl from 12 walks in with no formal training, shoots an apple out of a pig's mouth, and later blows up their food, outwits their pack, and walks out alive. At face value, she's a threat, but she's also an anomaly that breaks the story they've been promised since childhood. If a non-career can beat you at your own game, what does that say about your years of training? About your relationship to the Capitol that told you effort equals safety? District 11 sees something completely different. They don't see an anomaly. They see Rue. They see a girl who stopped playing the Capitol script long enough to sing a child to sleep, and then cover her body in flowers, then salute a district she's never met. There is a lot to uncover here, because Katniss thinks of that as a personal, moral choice. District 11 watches it as a public act of defiance broadcast into their fields. When they riot, it's not just grief. It's the shock of having one of their own honored on Capitol cameras by a girl the Capitol itself just paraded as entertainment. Now zoom out to the mid-tier districts. 5, 6, 9, 10. Not career hubs, not resource-starved coal mines. The middle. They've spent decades learning one rule: the Capitol always wins. Then they see the berries. 2 tributes forcing the game makers to choose between a double suicide and breaking their own rules. That part matters because it quietly rewrites the logic of the games. If the rules can bend once, could they bend again? Most of these districts don't have the weapons or organization to act on that insight yet. But the psychological damage is done. The games no longer feel inevitable. And then there's District 13, the professional cynics. To them, Katniss is usable material, a traumatized victor with authentic rage and a strong moral compass. Perfect recruitment tool. They read her not as a person, but as proof the Capitol's own propaganda has backfired. The mistake they make is assuming that because she hates the Capitol, she'll automatically love their strategy. She doesn't. Her independent moral decisions, saving Peter, refusing to be polished into a perfect Mockingjay, keep disrupting their plans. Pattern interrupt. Notice who we haven't asked yet. Katniss. Our narrative POV is so limited that we keep accepting her self-loathing as objective truth. But from the districts, she's not a confused, reluctant survivor. She's a mirror reflecting back each district's fears, hopes, and questions about the system. And that sets us up for the next step. Not just how she's seen, but how being seen that way starts to rewire her own identity. Bonus, 3 scenes that define Katniss's psychology. So how do you boil all of that down? The trauma, the rebellion, the self-hatred, the symbol. If you had to explain Katniss Everdeen's entire psychology using just 3 scenes, which ones actually hold the whole pattern? We're going to cover one from each phase of her arc, and once you see them as anchors, every other moment starts to snap into place. Scene 1. The reaping. I volunteer. That's the obvious answer. But here's the real question. Why does that split-second choice tell you more about Katniss than any speech she ever gives as the Mockingjay? At face value, it's simple. Big sister protects little sister. But there is a lot to uncover here. Katniss doesn't calculate odds, doesn't bargain, doesn't even look at the crowd for help. Her body moves before her brain does. That's a protector identity wired by years of parentifying after her father died and her mother shut down. Her attachment wound is right there. She learned early that adults won't keep you safe, so she becomes the adult. The takeaway, if you remember nothing else, Katniss's first instinct is always me instead of them. That part matters because it explains why she keeps stepping into new games she never actually wants. Scene 2. Rue's death and the flowers. On paper, that is a terrible survival move. You're in a murder arena. You stop to do a funeral. Why? This is where we talk about survival brain versus moral brain. The games are designed to keep you in pure survival mode. Move, hide, kill. Katniss does all of that. But when Rue dies, something snaps the other way. She refuses the Capitol script that says tributes are disposable. She straightens Rue's dress, sings, decorates her body with meadow flowers, and then salutes District 11 through the camera. It's grief, but it's also weaponized grief. She's using the cameras against the Capitol, insisting, "You will witness what you did." If you remember nothing else from this scene, whenever the system demands she dehumanize someone to stay alive, Katniss's core pattern is to humanize them harder, even if it puts her at risk. That's the seed of the Mockingjay, not the costume. Scene 3. The execution balcony. Katniss draws the arrow. Everyone expects Snow to die, and she kills Coin instead. Why is that the last brutal summary of who she is? By then, her moral injury is complete. 2 arenas, destroyed districts, Prim dead in a strategy meeting Coin orchestrated. Every authority that promised hope has betrayed her. So when Coin tries to reboot the games for the Capitol's children, Katniss sees it. The cycle starting over, just with a new logo. Shooting Coin is the final refusal to be a piece in anyone's games again. If you remember nothing else, when forced to choose between stability under corrupt power and chaos that might end the games, Katniss will burn the system, even if it leaves her with nothing. Use these 3 scenes as your compass. Volunteering shows her protector wiring. Rue's flowers show her moral rebellion. Coin's death shows her rejection of every power structure. If a moment fits those patterns, it's probably in character. even when she can't explain her own reasons out loud. And keep those in mind, because next we're going to ask how a person built on sacrifice, defiance, and distrust is supposed to survive in a world after the games end on paper, but never really end in her head. Final arrow. Why Katniss still haunts us so when the cameras cut and the anthem fades. What actually happens to a person built on sacrifice, defiance, and distrust. This is where we talk about why Katniss doesn't leave your head once the credits roll. At face value, she shouldn't be the kind of hero that lingers. She's not noble on command. She's petty, withdrawn, hyper-vigilant. She freezes, misreads people, lashes out at the wrong targets. She spends whole chapters wanting to run away instead of lead. But here's the real question. Why does that messiness make her feel more real than almost any destined savior the Capitol, or our own media, usually hands us? Katniss is a victor who never actually feels victorious. Her father dies in an explosion, her mother disappears into grief, and an 11-year-old turns into the primary provider for her district-sized world. That part matters because it means by the time the games start, her survival brain has been running the show for years. She's not brave because she loves risk. She's competent because she's been forced to treat every trip past the fence as a potential death sentence. So when the Capitol throws her into the arena, it's not hero's journey logic. It's a system weaponizing the exact instincts that kept her family alive. And the fear she carries that any choice she makes could get Prim killed, or Gale, or Peter, is the same fear a lot of us have in softer, less televised ways. What if your best intentions still hurt the people you love? What if you're being used by rules you don't even fully understand? There is a lot to uncover here. Katniss keeps trying to do the least harm in situations where every option is a different flavor of wrong. She honors Rue's body even though it paints a target on her back. She threatens double suicide with the berries, not as a grand theory of revolution, but because she can't stomach playing executioner one more time. Over and over, her moral brain crashes into the game's logic, and the Capitol accidentally broadcasts that conflict to every district. That's why calling her the Capitol's greatest mistake lands harder than calling her its destined savior. A savior implies this was always going to happen. A mistake says this system is fragile, contingent, stupid in its own overconfidence. Snow builds a propaganda machine, so efficient it forges its own destroyer, then can't fully understand why his symbol won't stay on script. And here's the real question for us. What do we do with that pattern once we see it? When another story hands you a hero who benefits from that narrative? Whose pain is being edited into inspiration? Whose district is being turned into spectacle so you'll keep watching the games? We're going to cover Katniss, but we're also quietly being asked to turn that lens on our news feeds, our reality shows, our political campaigns that promise hope while demanding someone else's suffering off screen. Because somewhere far from the cameras, in a victor's village that was supposed to be a reward and ended up a ruin, a woman who once burned a country down is teaching her children about the Hunger Games as history. She's explaining Tesserae and reaping balls and why their grandfather never came home from the mines. She's telling them about a girl who volunteered for her sister, and she is desperately hoping they never really understand what it felt like to be inside those arenas. The haunting question is whether we've already stepped into our own version of those arenas without noticing, and what it would take, in our world, to put the bow down instead of drawing one more arrow.